What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to the SI Sooners podcast, episode 8. We're moving right along. I told you guys last week that since our last podcast, I'm going to brag on us here. Last week we had 32 stories on the website, 32 new stories for you at SI Sooners, allsooners.com. Well, I am not one to go around one-upping myself, but this week we have 33 new stories, Parker. I counted them. Unbelievable. Every one of them on OU football. Well, there's one that's OU women's basketball, but Parker, 33, and we're still not even to game week yet, man.
I mean, that's just really indicative of what season of the year it is, John. We're gearing up for football. We're excited. We know Sooner Nation's excited, and we're going to keep pushing that content out at you.
I'm John Hoover. I'm in Tulsa. That's Parker Thune. He is in Norman, and we are, the last I checked, the number one website in Sports Illustrated's college network. SI Sooners, allsooners.com. Check back with me next week. Maybe I'll have an update for you. Maybe I won't. Maybe we'll still be number one next week. Who knows? If you haven't been over to our website yet and you're listening to this podcast or you're just, watching us on the YouTube, man, I don't know what's wrong with you. You really should pay us a visit. And if you do like the video version, just go over there to my YouTube channel, search for John Hoover Media. Not only is this podcast there, but every interview with the guys from Sooner Summit is there as well. That was 2 weekends ago now. I guess last weekend. The last one posts Thursday. We posted a new one today. Danny Stutzman was really good. I thought tomorrow will be the last one. We're going to have some bonus content for you on Friday, so you're going to want to check that out on YouTube. Today's SI Sooners podcast. Now, you want to talk about content. We're going to break down Tuesday's announcement that Spencer Rattler is the Sooners' starting quarterback. We're going to tell you why, besides the obvious, that Lincoln Riley has come to this conclusion. We'll hit some more highlights from Lincoln Riley's press conference yesterday. A lot of news came out of that thing, in my opinion. We had some news today, too, we're going to get to in just a second. Talked to Shane Beamer today and Calvin Thibodeau, a couple of assistant coaches. Last week we talked to Bill Bedenbaugh and Roy Manning. Or was that earlier this week, Parker? They're starting to run together.
They really are starting to run together. I believe it was last week. It was prior to the weekend, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, and I love talking to these assistant coaches this time of year because you get to the nitty-gritty on personnel issues and what they like about certain guys and what they maybe need more of out of other guys. I really do enjoy the time that we get with these assistant coaches. Parker, I think the thing that I can say about this week, especially after hearing Lincoln Riley basically say yesterday what I've been thinking, which is, man, it's really starting to feel like football season, right? I mean, after what felt like 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, Parker, did Central Arkansas and Austin Peay really flip the switch for us?
I would say we're getting close to the promised land, John, if that's the analogy you want to go with. But, yeah, I mean, how about it? Austin Peay and Central Arkansas, I never figured I could find myself that invested in an FCS football game. But, I mean, that was something tangible that we can all hang on to. Everybody watching that game kind of finally came to the realization that, oh, this is actually happening. There's going to be college football here in 2020 by hook or by crook. And we got treated to a fantastic game. And obviously now with the Sooners just about a week and a half out from action, I'm chomping at the bit, John. I know you are too.
Yeah, that game was it not, butt ugly for about 58 minutes. You had the 75-yard touchdown on the opening play, and then it was just like 50 minutes of stabbing yourself in the eyes until Austin Peay scores a go-ahead touchdown in the last minute, and then Central Arkansas comes back and one-ups them for the win. It was, I think, kind of, Parker, representative of what we're going to see a lot of this year, which is teams that aren't that polished, teams that maybe aren't prepared, teams that are missing key players, maybe a lot of key players in some instances. It was ugly-ass football. It was FCS football in a pandemic. And Lincoln Riley actually got a question about that yesterday, but he talked about that aspect of college football back in the spring, and he addressed it again this summer. He said guys are going to have to be ready to respond, almost like guys in a firehouse, like firemen. They're going to have to train, and they may never get that call. That bell may never ring for them to go sliding down that pole. But if they do, they better be ready to go fight that damn fire. You're going to see backups. You're going to see freshmen. You're going to see walk-ons. And I think it's possible. I think it's very likely that in a time of real need, you're probably going to see guys not just switching positions, but maybe even switching sides of the ball, Parker.
Yeah, certainly, and it's something that Oklahoma's no stranger to. You see guys flip sides of the ball all the time. You think about one of the most prominent Sooner alumni in the NFL right now, Lane Johnson, a guy that came to Oklahoma as a junior college quarterback with the intention of playing tight end, ends up playing defensive end, and makes the switch back again and has become one of the premier offensive linemen at the professional level. But no, I think you mentioned it, especially in the conversation that we had with Bill Bedenbaugh in his Zoom just a few days ago. He was one that particularly emphasized the fact that, hey, guys are going to need to be able to play multiple positions, and they're going to need to be prepared to play multiple positions, because the long and short of it, John, is that we just don't know how much of an actual impact COVID-19 is going to have on these teams individually. Now, granted, Austin Peay and Central Arkansas, after playing that game, they've gotten their 2 rounds of test results back, no positive tests, which is an awesome sign. But we know for a fact that's not going to be the case for every one of these teams that steps out there on the field in 2020. There's going to be attrition, and you're going to have to be prepared for that, because you don't know what scope that attrition is going to manifest itself in. You could have 1 or 2 guys go down. You could have an entire position group go down. And so that's one of the things that I think Bill Bedenbaugh in particular, as well as the rest of the Sooner assistant coaches, the offensive and defensive staff, are going to really have to be cognizant of, and they are. But they're going to have to head into 2020 with a bit of a different game plan. Not necessarily a different game plan in the sense that they've got a different mentality heading into game week, but just by virtue of the fact that week to week, day to day even, they don't know what their players' availability is going to look like or whether that's going to be impacted by the virus. They're going to have to be very flexible, and they're going to need players that are very flexible.
Parker, Oklahoma named its starting quarterback today. Here, let me get off camera for just a second. This came in the mail today. The new Lincoln Riley biography, Sooner, for the visually impaired, meaning those on the audio podcast. I'm holding up a copy of the book. So big news on the beat continues to happen. They named their starting quarterback yesterday. We anticipated it wasn't really big news. It was we knew who it was going to be. We'll talk about that in just a second. We got COVID updates. We got women's basketball updates. Man, Parker, the big news to me came today, and I mentioned it to my wife just a few minutes ago out here at dinner. The big news, press conferences are on Tuesdays now, not Mondays. What? What's going on there, man? What do you think about that? First of all, I know it frees up your Monday schedule quite a bit.
Yeah, that is true, and I do appreciate that. But no, it's going to be different, obviously, and what isn't different here in 2020. But I mean, for the longest time, and you know this much better than I, John, press conferences are a Monday thing. Fresh off the weekend, you get a chance to address the opponent ahead on the schedule, and so. I mean, I don't know that moving it to Tuesday has a huge impact. Obviously, for our end of things, our job requires us to kind of shift our schedule around a little bit to plan the content a little bit differently than we were anticipating. But, hey, at the end of the day, I'm just thankful that we're playing football, John, and I know you're right there with me. And hey, you know what? Whatever changes we have to make in order to make this season as streamlined and as smooth as possible, so be it. And if that means moving Lincoln Riley's press conference to a Tuesday, I'm all right with it.
I'm going to have to find out the reasons why. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, listen, that was our big news, not the quarterback thing. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but I'm talking about more big news came out today. Hey, are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman or a car dealership in Oklahoma City or a restaurant in Edmond, or maybe you're a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise and you just want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Well, then consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or DM us on Twitter at @all_Sooners. Follow SI Sooners on Twitter at @all_Sooners. Find Parker at Parker Thune, that's Thune, and I'm at John E. Hoover. Parker's also on Instagram, Parker Thune, and I'm on Facebook, John E. Hoover Media. And, of course, all my videos, OU, and lots of other stuff, that's all on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. Okay, there's our social media pitch. you guys know that I want to brush on this press conference thing just a little bit more, because Sooner Nation used to, Parker, they used to just hang on every word that Bob Stoops would say, okay? And it was always on Tuesday. It was kind of a gentleman's agreement, a handshake agreement with Oklahoma State, that all the media goes to Stillwater on Monday and all the media goes to Norman on Tuesday. Bob Stoops at some point said, this doesn't really work good for my schedule. I think I'd like to move it to Monday. And everybody at the first was like, what? You can't do that. We've been doing this for 40 years. Going back to Chuck Fairbanks' press conference used to be on Mondays. Well, Bob said, screw it. This is what I want to do. And so we adapted, and Bob switched his press conference from Tuesday to Monday. Well, I think the rest, especially as this thing's gotten on to the rest of, on TV, Fox Sports, it's become an event. People have started like setting their DVRs. People have started like listening in, tuning in, saying, I know, but it's just going to be different for people. And not only that, I left out a pretty important part. We're not going to be there. It's all going to be via Zoom. It's all going to be virtual. But I just got to say it. It's back on Tuesday where God intended it to be. It feels like you're riding the wave in college football. College football is very rhythmic to me, Parker. And on Monday, you ride this wave. And on Tuesday, you ride this wave. And Wednesday, you do something else. But every week is the same. Now, imagine if it's like that for us as writers, as TV guys, as video, radio guys, whatever. Imagine if it's like that for us, how things have changed. I want to put that in perspective, how things have changed for the players who have been trained their entire life to do a certain thing on Monday in the fall and then do another certain thing on Tuesday in the fall. They're still going to be doing that, but to a large extent, man, going all the way back to their training in February and March, it has been majorly disrupted. Okay, I'm done. We've hung on to this long enough. Spencer Rattler is going to be Oklahoma's starting quarterback, and if you want to read all about it, allsooners.com is the place to go. We've got 3 original stories posted about how he won the job, his path to the top of the depth chart, and what's next for Mr. Congeniality, Tanner Mordecai. I'm also working on another one tomorrow that I think is very interesting and is really kind of illustrates how absolutely rare this is for Oklahoma. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss that. So, Parker, without further ado, let's dive in. Just like Spencer Rattler, you've won the job from me right now. You have the floor. Show me your 5-star arm.
Well, in terms of Rattler winning the job here, John, you mentioned it's not a shock. He's one of the most physically gifted quarterbacks in the collegiate game already, and everybody that's seen him play, seen him practice, seen the way he throws the ball knows that to be true. This was never really a battle, I firmly believe, much like between Kyler Murray and Austin Kendall and between Jalen Hurts last year and Tanner Mordecai. I don't believe the battle between Rattler and Mordecai, the perceived battle, was ever really much of a fight at all. Rattler is, from a physical standpoint, ready to be the guy for Oklahoma, and he's been ready. That was never the question. I think having Hurts last year come in as a transfer was really, really good for Rattler and for the program as a whole, because I don't think Rattler would have been mentally ready to start as a true freshman, and I think that pressure would have been put on him had Jalen Hurts not entered the picture. Now, would he have won the job over Tanner Mordecai? I don't know. I don't think any of us know. That was something that we never really had to legitimately consider as a possibility just because of how early in the process Jalen Hurts decided that he was going to come to Oklahoma. But I think had he come to campus as a true freshman with the expectation that he was going to battle Tanner Mordecai for the starting job as a true freshman, everybody across Sooner Nation would have been operating under the expectation and the impression that he was going to be the guy, and I don't know that he was ready for it. Obviously, the arm strength is off the charts. He can get a little wild at times. He's got some things to kind of rein in terms of his ambitiousness from the pocket, if that's what you want to call it that. So the decision-making is going to be one thing that you're going to want to keep an eye on with Rattler going forward. He did tend to be a little bit more turnover-prone at the prep level than we often see from guys of that caliber. So if he... if the first couple of games roll around and he's taking too many shots down the field and putting the ball in harm's way, then maybe Riley needs to scale back a little bit on cutting him loose. I mean, obviously with two downfield threats, the likes of Charleston Rambo and Theo Howard, Rattler's the kind of guy that's going to want to make plays, make big plays, and get the ball down the field to those guys for big chunk gains. Whether that's going to be the most efficient and most effective approach for the Sooner offense, I'm not sure. But he's absolutely the kind of talent that could come out and just wow everybody with his ability to break a game wide open from the quarterback position. And then, as you mentioned, John, for Mordecai, he's really in the catbird seat here. He's got it all made because obviously he's going to be sitting behind Rattler this year, but he's not losing eligibility. And so once 2021 rolls around, and listen, Lord knows that in a world where Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams are on the same roster, Tanner Mordecai is never going to start on talent alone. So I think once he earns his degree from OU, and granted, given the fact that he's not losing any eligibility for this 2020 season, I think you can expect to see him elsewhere come 2021. And he's a guy that's very talented. We don't necessarily give Tanner Mordecai his due. He's a guy that's very capable of being the starting quarterback for Oklahoma. It just comes down to he's not the physical freak that Spencer Rattler is, and he never will be. And that's not a fair expectation to place on the guy. But 75% of other programs across the FBS, Tanner Mordecai would be the surefire starter at. And so I think you'll see him elsewhere come 2021. But I would expect that over his final year or two, whatever it is, of college football, you're going to see a glimpse of what the Oklahoma offense under Tanner Mordecai might have looked like. That said, I think Lincoln Riley loves where he's at with Spencer Rattler, and I think he's very comfortable turning over the keys to the offense to the redshirt freshman.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the number 75% because it reminded me of what Lincoln Riley revealed on his press conference yesterday. 70 to 75% of the snaps in this preseason is what Tanner Mordecai has missed. He's already behind the eight ball with a guy like Spencer Rattler coming in. With that kind of deficit in the balance of snaps with the ones or just work in general, he had no chance. In fact, if he's losing that much time, he's got to worry about is he the backup or is it going to be Chandler Morris who wins that backup job? So it's 11 days before when they announced it. Actually, I guess the decision was made 12 days if you believe that it wasn't made like last December in Atlanta. But the time frame fits perfectly with when Lincoln announced Baker, Kyler, and Jalen. We should probably, Parker, get to some other news from Lincoln Riley's presser yesterday. One, he told us that, the 17 guys who tested positive for COVID just 2 weeks ago, he said that number continues to shrink. They're getting a few more guys back just about every day. He said they have more bodies out there at practice. This is hugely important for this team to get ready for a game. Listen, I know it's Missouri State, and I know they've got 2 weeks until their next game, the Big 12 opener, but still, you've got to have people out there practicing. You've got to have people out there getting the snaps, getting the reps, getting the looks that they're going to be getting throughout the season. He said it's settled down. I don't think that's a permanent declaration, but he said it's settled down. The team has, according to Lincoln Riley's words, had an outstanding couple of weeks, but he reminded us again that it's literally going to be a week-to-week status kind of thing. I mean, we saw news, Parker, yesterday out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, for example, that the University of Alabama has had more than 1,200 positive cases, and it's just his general student body, not on the football team. I don't think Lincoln Riley has that many analysts on this. Not Lincoln Riley. Nick Saban. Jeez, what's wrong with my head? I don't think Nick Saban has that many analysts on staff. But that's it right there. That sells it to me that this thing ain't going away. Not close. Bob Bowlesby, remember, way back in April, he said that the OU Texas environment is a petri dish. We all got a kick out of that line. But listen, I say this news coming out of Tuscaloosa shows us that it's actually the college campuses that are the petri dish. It's the campuses that are going to be virtually impossible to control, Parker. And I just had this conversation with my daughter who's getting her master's degree up in Maine. College campuses, Parker, seem to be absolutely taking this thing to the extreme when it comes to caution. They're spending all kinds of money to implement new cleaning and sanitizing measures, COVID measures, testing. They're putting all these policies into place that are unprecedented. They're making everyone wear a mask. Parker, just last week, we were in Norman for that Unity March. literally the first event I've covered, by the way, as a member of the media since Pro Day back on March 9th, which is crazy. But everyone on campus, and I don't mean just everyone in the players and the team. I don't mean just everyone in the media. I mean everyone on that entire campus had a mask on. It is a rule. And my daughter tells me that her campus is the same thing. It's like psycho about it. Like you can't come on campus and you have to follow the arrows and you have to stand in certain places and you have to wear a shield if you're going to do something else. College campuses are taking it to the extreme more than probably anywhere, but I think hospitals and nursing homes, it's the liability issue. And yet here we see 1,200 kids on the Alabama campus get it. It's, it's going to hit the football team probably sooner than later. So this is the new normal for college football, the new normal for universities. It's just going to be impossible, Parker, to ask so many young people confined in one area to stay away from each other. You're on campus, Parker. Tell us, you're like our roving reporter in the street. Tell us what it's like out there in that war zone, Parker.
I mean, gosh, John, none of this is news to me. I gotta wear a mask and goggles and gloves whenever I walk into a computer lab. I mean, the University of Oklahoma, and as you mentioned, most universities across the country are taking extreme precautions to control this. But look, the reality is people are going to do their own thing, John. And you can have eyes all over the place, but you can't have eyes everywhere. And some people are taking this thing more seriously than others. Some people aren't taking it seriously at all. And so at the end of the day, when you got that many people in that close proximity, yeah, this thing is going to spread and it's not going to go away. And until we get a vaccine, whenever that may be, this is not an issue that's going to be eradicated, John. And so as we look ahead to what the 2020 college football season is going to look like and how the atmosphere at college campuses across the country is going to impact those plans, you really got to have some degree of concern because, yes, the athletic departments at these universities can form their own sort of bubble. They can keep these guys protected to a certain extent. But with the amount of people that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis, in classes, around campus, hanging out, eating, studying, that kind of thing, when you're around this many people, some of whom may be carrying the virus and may be completely asymptomatic and not know a thing about it, there's definitely a danger. There's obviously a danger that you're going to contract it at that point. And so let's not forget, John, these athletes are still students. They still have to go to class. They still have to interact with their classmates. They still have to sit next to people that aren't at all cognizant of what they're going through as athletes and how important it is to the landscape of college football as a whole that every single one of them stays safe from the virus. And so, yeah, I'm concerned. I think really the only way that this problem is going to be alleviated, John, is if colleges decide that, we're going to shift all our classes to online format and keep only the athletes on campus. And that's just not going to happen for a lot of reasons. And there's so much red tape and so much nuance to the way that this entire situation has unraveled and will continue to unravel. And the NCAA's increasingly superfluous presence in all of this. So I don't know what the solution is, John. I don't know that there is one right now, but I think we just kind of got to cross our fingers and hope that the safety measures and precautions that these universities have implemented are simply enough to get us through this fall and make sure that we can have a college football season. And then, once spring rolls around, then hopefully we can attack this thing with more fervor. But at this point in time, we're just kind of hoping for the best, riding it out.
Yeah, man, I'm with you. We'll see what happens next week. But, this week Lincoln Riley said the Oklahoma Sooners were basically like a mock game week. They're going through the motions. They're setting themselves up for the actions and reactions that they're going to have to go through next week, practices, walkthroughs, meetings, all that stuff. So, man, it almost feels like it's upon us because it really is upon us. Lincoln Riley remarked about that game last week, the UCA Austin P game, in a kind of a general sense about teams losing a bunch of people, trying to play out, the games with guys or out of position or backups or freshmen or walk-ons. He said it. The quality of football is not going to be as high. So that's where, Parker, my question becomes for college football in 2020. What is the cutoff point? What is the threshold for losing, quote-unquote, too many guys? Are you going to try to plow through and play with a bunch of dudes in quarantine and play with a bunch of guys on the field who are out of position or don't have experience or whatever? Or do you pull the plug on that game and ask your opponent to play later on, either in Big 12's case, one of the open dates? I think each team has 3. Or in the December 12th slot where they've tentatively scheduled the Big 12 championship. What's the cutoff there? How many is too many? And what if it's like just one entire position group, like we saw that with the team this past week? Lincoln Riley didn't tell us which group it was, but let's just say the whole offensive line goes out, or maybe it's all the quarterbacks in the meeting room. Everybody gets taken out at once. It doesn't take much. And then here's another part. Consider this picture. I like to try to envision what's possible or what crazy scenarios could unfold. Let's say Oklahoma's getting ready to go to Iowa State, but all of a sudden there's an outbreak on the OU roster, and OU can't field a team. They can travel, but they can't put 70 guys out there for a travel squad to play a college football game. Well, Iowa State's been doing everything right, and they've got everybody healthy, and they've got 0 COVID cases. Well, Iowa State's like, what now? Do they just say, okay, yeah, sure, that's fine. Let's push our game to December 12th, and we'll wait till you're healthy, and we hope we get it played then. Maybe it'll be available to us. Or do they wait? Do they say, wait a minute, hell no, all our guys are healthy. We did our part. You guys are either going to be here or it's a forfeit for the Cyclones. Of course, I think the Big 12 would step in, but what are they going to do? I mean, geez, there's so much to consider. We will try to keep you abreast and break it down as the weeks roll on. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, a bit more from Lincoln Riley's latest Zoom call. We'll hit on the assistant coaches that we talked to over the past few days, and Parker's going to give you one final recruiting update as we head into the 2020 college football regular season.
Hey there, loyal listeners. Parker Thune here with SI Sooners. Are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman, or a car dealership in Oklahoma City, or a restaurant in Edmond. Or maybe you're just a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise, and you want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or send us a direct message on Twitter at @all_Sooners.
Final segment of the SI Sooners podcast. Great question from Caleb McCoury of the OU Daily on the presser yesterday. What happens if Lincoln Riley gets quarantined? I thought Lincoln's answer was pretty revealing. He said, quote, sadly, we're waiting on that. Nothing from the NCAA or from our conference on that. I couldn't tell you. So in a way, didn't really say anything, but that's the revealing part, is he has no idea. If he gets COVID, if he tests positive, he doesn't know what to do. He did mention the possibility of, I guess, a special coach's box for anybody who has tested positive so they can kind of remain in quarantine and still be able to coach. Man, if anybody's going to break the quarantine rules, Parker, you know it's going to be a college football coach. Like a penalty box in hockey maybe, or one of those little covered things that they do in soccer, the benches. But, yeah, Lincoln Riley said out of that, he couldn't imagine a scenario where anybody in quarantine is going to be involved in a game day. Parker, let's talk about the roster. Who's going to be the alpha running back this year? Jace McClellan is in Tuscaloosa. Signing day flip. No word if he's one of the 1,200 COVID cases. Trey Sermon's in Columbus. He hit the transfer portal. No word if he's having deep regrets about leaving. And then Kennedy Brooks has opted out. So no word from Oklahoma on him whatsoever at all, per Lincoln Riley's policy last week. They're not going to talk about guys who opt out. And no word yet from the NCAA on Ramondre Stevenson's suspension, of course. So, Parker, big TJ Pledger fan?
Well, I'll tell you what, John. If you were paying attention to Riley's press conference yesterday, we found out that Riley himself is under the impression that Pledger's the most impressive guy thus far out of the returnees in the Sooner backfield. We're obviously operating under the assumption that Ramondre Stevenson is going to be suspended for at least the first 4 games of the season, stemming back to that positive drug test. just before the Peach Bowl. But, I mean, Pledger is a guy that has had much more of an impact on special teams than he has on the offense in his tenure as a Sooner. And then behind him on the depth chart, you're looking at two guys in Marcus Major and Seth McGowan that are extremely inexperienced. Major only has 10 collegiate carries to his name, and obviously McGowan's coming in as a true freshman. Behind him, you got walk-on Todd Hudson, who stands just 5'5", but I will say, John, the coaching staff has been very complimentary of Hudson's skill set, so it's not completely out of the question that he earns a few touches out of the backfield until, rather in the meantime, until Stevenson returns. And then you got Jaden Knowles, a junior college transfer. So 5 guys with 20 carries in 2019 between them. So out of those 5 running backs, you essentially only have Major and Pledger that bring back any experience out of the Oklahoma backfield from last season, and each of them only carried the ball 10 times. So look, John, I'll tell you what, Ramondre Stevenson was impressive in very limited action last year. He averaged 8 yards a carry and showed remarkable burst for a guy of his stature. I don't think it's a question that when he returns, he's going to be the guy out of the backfield, but the question remains, what does Oklahoma do in the meantime? And there's no clear answer. And Pledger just he doesn't seem like the type of guy that's going to tote the ball 20, 25 times a game. He just doesn't. He's not really built for it. And is Major that guy? I don't know. Maybe. How impressed is the coaching staff with McGowan and his skill set and his work ethic? We haven't heard his name come up as much when we have been on these Zooms with the coaches and they've been talking about spotlight players on the offensive side of the football. So I don't know. It's really a muddied picture, John, and the Sooners are just going to have to make do until Stevenson gets back. Once he gets back, I think they're in solid hands. Until then, it's just kind of, hey, everybody chip in, get what we can here and there, and we'll try to make it work.
And that's going to be tough with the opening Big 12 schedule that they have. Let's talk about Stevenson a little more. His suspension for the positive drug test by the NCAA is for half the season, technically. Okay, so he served 1 game last year, so that means he's got to serve 5 games this year. So if half the season is 5 games, does 5 games translate to half of 10 this year? In other words, 5 plus 1, because that's 6. That's more than half of 10, right? Should be 5. So that would mean he only misses 4 this year. Well, the 4th game is Texas. Man, it's a mess. I don't know how they're going to calculate this. And here's the deal. OU has appealed months ago, for it to be reduced or removed completely. If they reduce it, could they reduce it could they just pick an arbitrary number? Could they say, okay, last year's Peach Bowl was 1 game. This year's season opener is 2 games. We'll cut it in half, make it 3 games, and he can play the rest of the year. Are they going to do something like that? Would OU settle for like a 4 games? OU will settle for whatever the NCAA says, of course, if they can get him back early, but what if he came back for Texas? I mean, he's physically equipped for that game. That's a game that Oklahoma could really use a guy like Ramondre Stevenson. Maybe a 2-game suspension with the bowl game, Missouri State. Boom, he's back for Big 12 play. Would that not be the ideal scenario? Could the NCAA just say, you know what, let's lift the remaining suspension in light of everything that's going on right now? I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think they're really – honestly, I don't think they're going to bother even reviewing it. They've got so much on their plate right now. There's just too much going on in the world for them to worry about a marijuana suspension. But by the way, Parker, I'm predicting big things for Seth McGowan. We shall see. Last week, we talked to Roy Manning and Bill Bedenbaugh, and we wrote all kinds of stories at SI Sooners. Trey Brown is looking like a different player altogether. It's his senior year. He's got the NFL ahead of him. He's obviously got a lot to prove. And then on the offensive line, Stacey Wilkins could be a real candidate to switch from backup right tackle last year to starting left tackle this year. Those are Bill Bedenbaugh's words. Bedenbaugh said that he's more of just a natural left tackle. Parker, what were your takeaways from talking to those 2 guys last week?
Well, yeah, I mentioned it a bit earlier in the podcast, John. I think my biggest takeaway from the chat with Bedenbaugh is that it's all hands on deck in his mind, and he's very much concerned with making sure that every single guy on that offensive line, with the exception of Creed Humphrey, who will be the starting center until the second he's ready to move on, is going to be prepared and has to be prepared to play multiple positions along the line. And he's said he's shifting guys around. He's playing guys inside, playing them outside. He was really complimentary of a few guys in particular. You mentioned Stacey Wilkins. Also, Andrew Rain. He's making some noise. Is he going to start as a true freshman? I don't know. But he's certainly made his case. And that's evident in the way that Bedenbaugh has talked Rain up and the way that the rest of the coaching staff and Lincoln Riley has talked him up. And we'll go back to what you mentioned about Trey Brown in our conversation with Manning, John. This is a guy that does have a legitimate NFL future ahead of him. And look, everybody knows him for the speed, right? And you remember the chase down last year in the Big 12 championship against Baylor that might have saved the game when he ran down Chris Platt on what would have been a breakaway touchdown and cracked 23 miles an hour. And everybody knows Trey Brown is fast. But I don't think we give him enough credit for what a fantastic cover corner he is. And if you look at the metrics and the stats from last year, Trey Brown is one of the finest returning cover corners in college football from a statistical standpoint. And when you combine that with his supreme athleticism and his ability to impact the game, not just on defense, but in the return game as well, I think you've got to really be excited for his potential and how he can continue to realize it come his senior season here in 2020. Well, it is technically a senior season, but it's not counting against his eligibility. So could he come back in 2021? I don't know, maybe, but I would imagine that the NFL will make that quite the decision for him, because I think once this year has come and passed, he'll be in the conversation as an early round NFL draft pick.
Yeah, listen, if Roy Manning can resuscitate Parnell Motley's career and can make Trey Brown into an NFL draft pick, Roy Manning needs to get a raise. And speaking of coming back for 2021, I hope the NFL doesn't take you, Parker, from SI Sooners. Let's talk about today. Calvin Thibodeau said today that Perion Winfrey, the junior college transfer, the nose guard, said he is, quote, forming good habits in the midst of a pandemic. And he said that Winfrey and LaRon Stokes are being alphas in just knowing what's expected, knowing how to get things done. I thought that was an impressive statement from your coach to say this newcomer and this senior, a couple of JUCO guys, they're the alphas. I thought that was important that's an important step for this defensive line, missing the four seniors that graduated last year, including Neville Gallimore. And then today, Shane Beamer had nothing but good things to say about his tight ends, his fullbacks, and his H-backs. He said that their emphasis this year has been on yards after the catch, getting upfield with the football under their arm. And when you catch the ball in space like they do at this position at Oklahoma, and it's a total surprise to everyone in the stadium, including the defense, you better have the ability to get the football up the field. Parker, what stayed with you about our interviews with those guys today?
Well, I heard Austin Stogner's name, and I want to go back. I want to go back to Austin Stogner, John, because I am so excited to see this guy here in 2020. Have you seen Austin Stogner? Have you seen pictures of this man, John? He's tipping the scales at 262 pounds these days. 6'6", 262. That dude is going to be an absolute monster in the Sooner offense, especially with what we assume is going to be an increase in snaps. I don't see why Austin Stogner wouldn't enter 2020 as the starting tight end for Oklahoma, right?
Yeah, and as Beamer said, he's 262, and he's been spending the entire offseason working on his quickness, his explosion, his steps, his footwork. Put those two things together for a second. Wow.
And the thing about Stogner, John, is that he's not in the same vein as a lot of these other bigger tight ends. He's a guy that plays slot receiver just as well as he plays the tight end position. He moves a lot better than you would expect from a guy that stands 6'6" and 260. And so I think he very much has an opportunity to be the most dominant pass catcher that Oklahoma has seen at the tight end position since Mark Andrews. And granted, that wasn't all that long ago, but I think that's an element of the Sooner offense that's really been missing this last couple of years, is a dominant presence at tight end. And you think about what Mark Andrews was able to do on the receiving end of Baker Mayfield's passes. I think Austin Stogner has the potential to do something very similar with Spencer Rattler at the helm. You get that guy in space, not only is he overpowering, but he's quick. And he's shown that his athleticism isn't just limited to pass catching. He's been a phenomenal contributor on special teams. And He's a guy that you can put all over the field. He's listed, well, I shouldn't say he's listed, but he's considered an H-back more than anything else. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they're using Stogner all over the field in different packages in this 2020 season, taking advantage of his supreme size and speed and that combination that he brings to the table. So more than anything, John, I would say that Austin Stogner is probably the guy that I'm most excited to see on the Sooner offense in 2020 because the possibilities are endless with a guy like that.
Parker, before we wrap it up, besides our conversations, obviously, with the players from the Sooner Summit last week, which you can all find, every one of them at allsooners.com, what's the latest, Parker, on the recruiting front?
Well, there's not a whole lot to speak of, John, because we're obviously coming off the heels of an NCAA dead period. So there hasn't been all that much news across the wire over the last week, 2 weeks. We did learn today that L.J. Johnson, 4-star running back out of Cy-Fair High in Texas, has put Oklahoma in his Final Four. To be honest, John, I think that decision for him is going to come down to Texas and Texas A&M. I don't think Oklahoma and LSU are a serious consideration for him at the moment. But I will say, especially given all the conversations that we've had about what the Sooner backfield looks like right now, John, their pursuit of Kamar Wheaton is priority A1 for Oklahoma as this recruiting cycle winds down to National Signing Day in December. Kamar Wheaton is the guy that they need more than anybody else. And there are other guys that would be nice to have. Emeka Egbuka, obviously, Tristan Lee, Bryce Foster, some of those big-name guys would be awesome to add to this recruiting class for Oklahoma. But right now, their most immediate need is in the backfield. And it's going to be the backfield again come 2021 because you would presume that Brooks is off to the NFL and you're in no clearer waters than you are right now here in 2020. So the Sooners really need Kamar Wheaton. And so I would imagine that they are going to make a push for him more than anybody else over the final 3 months of this recruiting cycle.
You can listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. We're still shooting for Google, so be patient. Just go to our website, allsooners.com, click on the player, listen on either your phone or your computer or your tablet, whatever. Or just check out the video version over on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. For Parker Thune, I'm John Hoover. See you guys.